More than 6 decades ago, Medgar Evers made history, being the first black Mississippian to make a speech on local television. He called for a boycott of Jackson businesses as racial segregation was at its peak. As our Rosalind Anderson reports, today the search continues for that video.
Medgar Evers was among one of the first to campaign against the station.
Medgar Evers was NAACP Field Secretary on May 20th, 1963, when he appeared on WLBT, demanding equal treatment, speaking out against segregation. His 17-minute appearance was mandated by the Federal Communications Commission after the station's refusal to give equal airtime to the civil rights cause. Dr. Carolyn Bain, a Millsaps professor, presented tonight only Medgar Evers on Jackson, Mississippi television, a discussion of his lost speech. The footage disappeared and was not included in archival video the station donated to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History in the 1980s.
In Merle Evers Williams' memoir, she says specifically that Medgar Evers did not record at WLBT. She says that he was taken to an out-of-the-way location to film and that it was then aired later that evening. It was not live.
In the 1950s, WLBT was one of 2 stations in Jackson. It aligned with the Segregationist Citizens Council, which aired regular programming, refusing to show blacks on network television. Rena Evers Everett was 8 years old and watched her father's speech with her mother and brothers.
It was very difficult to keep some of that documentation.
Death threats followed, called into the station, 30 minutes of violent racial comments. A month later, Evers was assassinated. An NBC documentary on the civil rights leader aired in September. It did not appear on WLBT. In Jackson, Rosalind Anderson, 3 on your side.